On October 9, 1942, at an altitude of 20 feet above a jungle-covered island called Guadon, Canada, a 22-year-old American pilot named Marion Kay was fighting for his life. He was piloting a Grumman F-4 CAD, a heavy and short fighter jet, but he was being pursued. His enemy is a Mitsubishi ASM-0, a lightweight and agile aircraft that seems to have come from the future. It has the ability to spin twice as fast as the white card and can fly as high as a rocket. Over the past year, Zero has become a phantom that dominates the skies from Pearl Harbor to the Philippines. Marion C is an excellent pilot, but right now he's just a lip-syncing guy. Zero was chasing him. He dashed down, WC accelerated, but Zero was still close behind. He tried turning the remote to the right, but the WC reacted sluggishly, like a Raspberry Pi, feeling uncontrollable. Zero had anticipated that and fired at him. Car's steering wheel exploded, shrapnel piercing his leg and causing the control system to malfunction. He was forced to parachute into shark-infested waters, surviving only by a miracle. That is the reality of air warfare in the Pacific. This is Wadden Cow. But just a few weeks later, another farmer from South Dakota will take to the same skies and change everything. This wasn't just a war. It was like a mortar where American pilots were sequentially fed into the mouth of the Japanese war machine. American media outlets refer to the pilots here as a gloomy air force. The pilots called their own bases. Henderson Field is a cemetery. The issue isn't simply about Zero. It's about the principles of warfare. Experts and engineers in the US have come up with a very simple solution. Never spin with a zero. That's a principle that PBA-18 pilots must also follow. Take advantage of speed and cover, dive down, shoot, and retreat. But in the chaotic dogfights over Guadalcanal, this principle has resulted in many deaths every day. Japanese pilots are all seasoned veterans. They fought in China and Pearl Harbor. They know their plane very well. They tricked the American pilots into turning back. They know the WC reacts slowly. They knew exactly where to shoot. America is failing miserably. What the Air Force didn't know, and what even the most experienced Japanese pilots couldn't know, was that the solution was on its way. But it is not a new aircraft, nor is it a new principle from Washington. He was a 27-year-old farmer, a very ordinary man, who had been told he was too old to fight. The photo shows him learning to shoot not from military textbooks, but from hunting rabbits in the icy fields of South Dakota. This is the story of Joseph J. Foss, and a simple but forgotten farmer's trick transformed his music into America's greatest pilot. To understand how a simple farmer could terrify the Japanese Air Force, you first need to understand life on a farm. Joe Foss is not a professional soldier. He was born in 1915 on a remote farm without electricity near Sioux Falls, South Dakota. His childhood wasn't spent at school desks, but amidst dirt, cold, and strong winds. This is a David and Goliath story, similar to Shimo's or He's One. But in Foss's case, Goliath is not just an enemy, but his very life. The Great Depression struck Dakota like a barrage of artillery fire. The land became barren, the crops failed, and the family had nothing to live on. Foss's unwavering spirit was forged through hardship. He and his father had to hunt for food. This is where the secrets began. When 12-year-old Joe Foss went rabbit hunting, he had no scope, only an old shotgun and a self-taught principle. Don't waste ammunition. A rabbit doesn't run in a straight line. Instead, it will weave, hop, and change direction. To hit it, you can't aim straight at it. You have to aim at where it will run. This is called misfire. While other children were learning math, Foss was calculating the trajectory, wind speed, and velocity of a projectile in his head at a rapid pace. He's not only a good marksman, but also a predator. He has a thorough understanding of the science behind hitting moving targets. That's a skill he couldn't learn from military textbooks. But Foss didn't want to hunt rabbits. He wanted to fly. In 1933, his father took him to see an air show. He saw a squadron of Marines flying in biplanes and was fascinated from that moment on. He told his father that's what he would do. The road ahead is full of thorns. He was a poor farmer's boy with no educational background. When his father died after falling electrical wires, 19-year-old Joe had to drop out of school to manage the farm. He felt trapped, but remained strong. He works on the farm during the day and attends classes at night. It took him 6 years to earn enough credits and get into college, and he made money washing bass guitars to get his pilot's license. When Pearl Harbor was attacked, Joe Foss was 26 years old. He quickly applied to join the Navy to become a pilot, but was rejected because he was too old. In 1941, the age limit for a fighter pilot was 25. They told him he could be a flight instructor, teaching other children how to fly a plane. It was a huge shock. Just as the experts told McKenna that the cables were up to standard, or as they told Simo or him to use the scope. There was also a technical doctor who said Force was not fit for combat. Force did what McKenna did. He tried to push beyond the limits. He joined the Marine Corps Reserve and became a teacher. And during those 9 long, agonizing months, he watched the 20-year-old boys he had trained being sent off to fight. Force was extremely angry. He pressured his superiors to allow him to participate in the fighting. He wrote the letter making noise. According to him, he was the loudest and most unpleasant instructor in the Navy. Finally, to silence him, they agreed. They sent him to advanced pilot training and assigned him to a new squadron, VMF 121. In October 1942, while Marion Cow was being shot down, Joe F., a 27-year-old farmer from South Dakota, was put on a transport ship. His destination is Henderson-Guadalcanal Airport. The place he arrived at was not a military base, but rather a veritable hellish realm. As soon as he stepped off the plane, a foul stench hit him in the face. A damp mixture of decaying jungle machine marks and death. The runway was simply a stretch of uneven, rocky ground carved out between rows of coconut trees. The operations center is a small wooden house called Pagoda. The pilots' living quarters were tents with muddy floors, and wreckage of aircraft was everywhere. Dozens of F-4F WCP-3A-19s were abandoned on the side of the runway, wings broken, engines malfunctioning, and cockpits stained with blood. This is the graveyard of the Cactus Air Force. Force was assigned to his tent where he met his teammates who would be flying with him. They are no longer the vibrant young men they were when he was training them. They are like ghosts. Their faces flushed from Atoprin, an anti-malarial drug. Their eyes were bloodshot from lack of sleep. Their flight suits were covered in sweat and machine oil. They are veterans, but they are also the hunted. When the old farmer walked in, they looked at him as if he were a freshly butchered piece of meat. He is another corpse to replace the one who died yesterday. Force looked at the plane assigned to him, a Grumman FF White Cat. That was the plane that Marion K. was shot down in. It was heavy, slow, and, according to all the information, a zero-sized flying coffin. The unit's executive officer, a man named Dew, gave Force a standard B briefing, which is now putting them in danger. Never flip Zero over. Never. Joe Force listened. He nodded. He understood those words, but he also understood what this teaching had overlooked. He understands rabbits. The following morning, Force will undertake his first mission. He will fly straight into the war zone. He's a farmer in a flying coffin preparing to face the world's most advanced fighter jet, and he's about to employ a trick not found in any material. Joe FC's first flight on the Guardian Canaan wasn't a training session, it was a test by fire. He soared to an altitude of 15 feet, his eyes scanning the vast, empty blue sky. The ghosts in his unit had warned him. They will appear from the direction of the sun. You'll never see them until they shoot at you. Force is leading the first patrol and feels completely lost in the music. Suddenly the radio blared. Enemy at the 11 o'clock high. For looked up and saw them. A formation of Mitsubishi Zeros hurtling down, faster than anything he had ever seen. He asked the order never to laugh, pressed the penguin button and ran. Force pushed the steering wheel forward, sending his WC hurtling down the slope at breakneck speed. The heavy aircraft accelerated. The Zeros gave chase. One of them opened fire. The pursuing bullets whizzed past the windshield so close that they startled him. He continued to plummet until he was almost in the forest canopy, trying to escape the tail of the Zeros. He returned to Henderson Airport, his hands trembling. Not out of fear, but out of anger. That doctrine is wrong. He knows that. You can't win by running away. You can only survive, and Joe Force didn't come here to survive. He came here to hunt. On October 13th, just a few days after his arrival, Force led another patrol. This time they encountered a group of Japanese bombers with zero protection. The aerial battle began, and everything descended into chaos. The WC and Zero aircraft intertwined in mid-air. Force saw a Zero targeting his teammate from behind. The Japanese pilot is closing in to kill him. The doctrine dictated that Force should land, should find an easier target, but with the eyes of a farmer, he thought differently. Force turned his toilet upside down, not just aiming at the Zero, but at the spot where the rabbit would appear. He pressed the trigger, 6.50 caliber machine, guns whirring in gold. He fired a 3-second burst, not at the enemy aircraft, but at a patch of blue sky 200 feet in front of it. That seems like a mistake, a wasteful rash. But the Japanese pilot, focused on his target, didn't see Force. He performed a perfect flip and flew straight into a stream of .50 caliber bullets. Zero's wing is simply broken. The plane disappeared in a cloud of smoke and flames. That was Force's first victory. He didn't defeat Zero by overcoming it. He didn't run away from it. He thought beyond it. He employed a farmer's logic that the experts in Washington had forgotten. When he landed at Henderson Airport, he has become a different person. Ghosts gathered around him. He had his first victory. He told his squadron commander that although the plane was heavy, it was powerful and shot very accurately. He told the other pilots, "Forget what they taught you. Don't chase after them. Let them. Keep leading until you think you're going to miss. With further guidance, they will fly straight in there." That was a change in mindset, not a physical change in the aircraft. That's the confidence of a farmer. The pilots listened. They desperately needed a leader. Their explosive shirt Marion Carl is still recovering. They needed a leader, and this 27-year-old farmer was the only one who spoke about hunting, not flaying. Force led a flight crew of 8 cats. They are a group of outsiders, outcasts, newcomers. They don't have a nice name. So, the reporters who followed the old man leading this chaotic unit gave them a name. They call this Force's Flying Circus. And on October 16th, the circus began its performances. Force led his 8 planes straight into a formation of 32 Japanese aircraft, 322 against 8. It was suicidal, but Force had a plan. He didn't intend to fight. He will use the logic of a farmer. He ordered the squadron to use touch wave, a new tactic where pilots flew in pairs to protect each other's tails. Force rushes down. He saw a Zero and didn't turn back. Joe Foss shot down a Zero aircraft. As another Zero swooped down, Force's teammate, who was flying alongside, saw it and immediately turned around to shoot down the plane pursuing Force. Within 10 minutes of intense fighting, the Force's 8-plane squadron shot down 5 Japanese aircraft, and the Force itself destroyed 2. Upon returning to base, all 8 aircraft arrived safely. While the enemy was suffering heavy losses, the number of aircraft shot down began to increase at an unbelievable rate. That's very similar to Shimo's achievement. On October 18th, Force shot down 2 more. By October 20th, he had dropped another one. And just 10 days after shooting down his first opponent, Joe Foss became a sharpshooter with 5 victories. On October 25th, he shot down 3 Zeros in a single day. The former farmer has now become the deadliest pilot on the island. He's not just a pilot, but also a leader. His team is dominating the skies. However, like Simo or he, this success did not come easily. The Japanese began to get angry because they were losing an unimaginable number of aircraft. Their seasoned pilots were shot down by Royal Cats. This is something they find inexplicable, and the name they often heard on the radio was Force. The Japanese command began to take notice of this. Just like the Sapka command paid attention to Shimo or Saburo Sakai paid attention to P-318. The enemy is changing tactics. They're no longer just fighting stray cats. They're hunting down Force's flight crew. The fight has now become a personal one. On November 7th, Force, leading his flight crew, was attacked by a group of elite Japanese pilots. The sky was filled with airplanes. Force shot down 2 Zeros and was aiming for the third when his plane was ripped apart by fire from behind. The engine exploded and the cockpit filled with smoke. He was thrown off the island and had to parachute out. The plane crashed into the forest. Force was rescued, was a little shaken but not seriously injured. Just 2 days later, he returned to the skies, this time pursuing a Japanese Marine aircraft. While focused on the target, he failed to notice the gunner at the rear of that aircraft. The gunner opened fire, destroying the Force's engine. For the second time in 3 days, his plane had crashed. But this time he wasn't in the forest, he was at sea. He had to jump into the middle of the Pacific Ocean, about 10 miles from shore, in one of the shark-infested waters. He was floating in a life vest, the water getting colder and colder. Force, with the resilience of a farmer, was accustomed to waiting and surviving. But then he saw shark fins, dozens of them, spinning around and bumping into him. The Force who was hunting Sanjuro has now become the prey. He struggled in the water, patiently waiting, watching the fins getting closer and closer. No weapons, no radio, only the unwavering will of the peasant. For 4 hours, he drifted and was surrounded. Just as the sun was setting, a boat appeared. These were local people sent there by an Australian Coast Guard supervisor. Luckily, they saw his plane fall, so they climbed closer, splashing water as they went to drive the sharks away. They pulled the exhausted pilot, who was suffering from hypothermia, out of the water. When he arrived at Henderson Airport, he was completely exhausted. He had a fever and also malaria. The doctors advised him to rest in bed. Joe Foss, the brilliant pilot of all time, is confined to a hospital bed. His team had to continue on their own without his services. The Japanese believed he was dead. The ghost of Wadden Cannon has finally disappeared. But they were wrong. Joe Foss lay in bed for 2 weeks, high with fever, thinking only of one thing: the rabbits that had escaped. Finally, he recovered. Foss left the hospital, climbed into a new toilet, and on November 30th, He went hunting again. He shot down another Zero. The ghost has returned, full of rage. The Japanese poured all their resources into Britain, but the force continued. By May 15, 1943, Joe Foss's record had stopped at 23. He was still a short distance from the record for the greatest American aircraft shot down. Of the 26 cars set up by the legendary Eddie Rickenbacker during World War I, only 3 had music. That's a sacred number that no pilot has ever achieved. And now, a 27-year-old farmer from South Dakota is piloting a fighter jet and is about to break that record. By May 1943, the name Joe Foss had become legendary in Canaan. But it is also a legend written from exhaustion and high fever. The farmer, who was 27 years old, is now a living corpse. The malaria he had contracted had returned with great force. He continued flying despite his intense fever. His ground crew stood watching as he landed. His White Cart fighter jet was riddled with bullet holes, and his body trembled from the fever. It got to the point where they had to lift him out of the cockpit. He was drenched in sweat. He is fighting on 2 fronts. One in the air to fight the Japanese army, and one inside the body to fight malaria parasites. And he's winning both wars. The total number of aircraft he shot down was 23. The all-time American record, set by legendary pilot Eddie Rickenbacker, is 26. The number 26 is not just a statistic. It's a symbolic mountain representing America's ultimate victory in the skies. For 2 decades, no pilot came close to that number. Now, a farmer's son from South Dakota, who's piloting what people call a flying coffin, is about to conquer that mountain. On May 15, 1943, Foss felt unwell, and his doctors forbade him from flying, but he ignored their warnings. He dragged himself into the cockpit, his head throbbing with pain. News spread that a massive Japanese naval fleet was en route to the island. Foss and his crew were ordered to take off to intercept them, the sky darkening with aircraft. This was the biggest air battle Foss had ever seen, with Zeros and WCs mixed together in a chaotic fight. Even though his vision was blurred by fever, he still had to rely on instinct. He saw a Zero targeting his teammates. He reacted immediately without thinking. He flipped the toilet upside down, not aiming it at Zero, but at the space where the plane would appear. He fired his gun. The .50 bullets ripped through the empty space. The Zero, while spinning, flew straight into a wall of bullets. The plane was completely destroyed. That was his 24th victory. He looked around the battlefield and saw another Zero hurtling down on another group of W cards. Foss pressed the accelerator, the engine roaring, and he shook off the Zero. The Japanese pilot spotted Foss and attempted to overtake him, a classic Zero tactic. But Foss didn't fall for the trap. He executed an attack from above, a move he had perfected. He flipped over on the Zero from its blind spot and fired a burst of accurate shots. The Zero's engine exploded. That was his second achievement. He equaled Rick and Becker's record. Now he has officially become a living legend. But he didn't stop there. He saw another Japanese plane, an aircraft skimming across the water, trying to escape the battle. Foss swooped down as the pilot, Rowe, saw him and awkwardly fumbled around in the circle. This is the final test. The perspective of a farmer compared to that of a seasoned Japanese pilot. Foss isn't just chasing, he's calculating. He identified the GRU's escape route. He pushed the nose of his plane up, firing a series of long, arc-shaped bullets that seemed to defy the laws of physics. The .50 bullets flew in a perfect trajectory, hitting precisely the spot in the sky where the R was attempting to escape. The plane was hit by gunfire right in the cockpit. It fell and tumbled into the Pacific Ocean. That was his 26th victory. One afternoon, while still shivering from malaria, Joe Foss shot down 3 enemy planes. He leveled and then broke the unbeaten record. He landed the toilet at Henderson Airport. The entire base stood waiting. The cemetery has been transformed into a field of victory. The spirits of Cactus Air Force lifted the old farmer out of the cockpit and carried him on their shoulders. He was undoubtedly the American yellow jersey winner. But while the pilots at Guadalcanal rejoiced, the Japanese command at Rabin was saddened. This is Saburo Sakai's time. This is Pavel's diary, the enemy's reaction. For months, the Japanese pilots operated with absolute confidence. They are driving the A-60, a marvel of engineering. They are experienced drivers. They knew that F-4 Cat was inferior. They destroyed dozens of them. Their theory is very simple. A Y-Tech makes a loop, waits for it from behind, and eliminates it. But then Force's air squadron appeared, and suddenly this doctrine was no longer effective. The Japanese pilots landed and returned to their ships, their faces pale and their hands trembling. Their music tells intelligence officers incomprehensible stories. They said they rushed down into a toilet, but it wouldn't run. They said they lured it into a loop, but it didn't follow. Instead, the American plane did something strange. It tumbles, swerves high, or plunges down seemingly randomly, shooting into empty space. And then, a second later, the Zero next to them exploded. They couldn't understand what was happening. They are being hunted by a way of thinking they cannot understand. Joe Foss did what Shimo did. He took away all of the enemy's advantages. Shimo concealed himself by hiding his shadow and his breath. Foss makes his intentions ambiguous by never aiming at a target. The Japanese pilots are fighting a ghost. They are confronting an intangible concept not crafted from piano strings, but forged in the mind of a hunter from South Dakota. Foss shattered their confidence. He proved that Zero was not invincible. He proved that a substandard WC in the hands of a pilot with a deep understanding of the science of hunting rabbits is the deadliest weapon in the sky. Japanese pilots, who once pursued worldwide card as a sport, are now becoming hesitant. They became more cautious, and the Cactus Air Force was no longer a target. They became hunters, and everything depended on one man who had been told he was too old to fight. But this victory came at a very unfortunate price. This is the price to pay. Shimo Hiha once faced a bullet with devastating power. The price Joe Foss had to pay wasn't just a bullet, but a long and painful journey. The day after setting the record, Foss was unable to fly again. The Z fever defeated him. He became too weak to stand up, constantly suffering from fevers and fatigue. He lost over 13 kilograms. The man who once bravely faced his enemies now has to battle his own health. Foss did not leave during a victory parade. He was carried out on a stretcher, looking like a ghost. His body was ravaged by the very island he had helped protect. He was taken to a hospital in the Pacific and then returned to the United States. He is a national hero, but he is also someone who has faced hardship. However, Joe Foss has the strong will of a farmer. He spent months recovering at a naval hospital in San Diego. And there, the country he served finally recognized him. On May 18, 1943, Joe Foss, a farmer from South Dakota, stood before the White House. President Franklin D. Roosevelt awarded him the nation's highest honorary medal. The text praises his fearless courage and unparalleled fighting skills. But what is his true legacy? That is the hope. In 1942, America was losing the war. The Zero aircraft became a legendary dominant force. The Japanese are considered unstoppable. Joe Foss, with 26 victories in just 44 days, shattered that myth. He proved that an American farmer's son on an American plane could take down the best the enemy had. He not only wrote a new chapter in aerial combat, but also an entire guidebook on how to defeat Zero. Skills such as offset firing and rock and wood tactics that he perfected became the new doctrine for the entire Pacific Fleet. He saved Wad Can, and in doing so helped change the entire musical landscape of the war. And what happens to someone who becomes the villain of villains when the war is over? Unlike Corporal McKenna, who kept his invention a secret, Foss's bravery was celebrated. But like Shimoha, he never forgot his roots. He didn't stay in the military, but returned to his home planet on Dakota. He used his fame not for personal gain, but to serve the community. He began to venture into politics. Foss was elected to the Dakota State Legislature, and in 1954, the farmer who had previously been considered unfit was elected governor of Dakota. He served his people in the same way he had served his country. He later became the first commissioner of the American Football League and a beloved figure nationwide. But deep down he was still a farmer, someone who understood the simple and brutal logic of the hunt. That's how war is won. It wasn't because experts or engineers read from a manual, but because individuals spotted the flaws. James Mina, a mechanic, spotted a defect in the P318's control cable. He realized a loose 3 to 8 inch section could be fatal and repaired it with a 6-inch piece of piano wire. Shimo Hiha, the farmer, also saw a flaw in the sniping doctrine. He found that a high-tech scope could reflect light and overcame this by using his reliable iron sights. As for Joe F., the country boy, he recognized the weaknesses of his low-quality airplane. He realized that it was impossible to get past a Zero, but it could be overcome with just his brain, and he overcame it with the peasant's perspective he had cultivated throughout his life. These are the untold chapters of history, the stories of those who broke the rules. Joe Foss passed away in 2003 at the age of 87. He was buried with full military honor, a national hero, a Marine legend, and a testament to the invincible strength of the American farmer. If you find this story as captivating as we do, please take a moment to like this video. This allows us to share many previously untold stories from World War II. Subscribe to stay updated with untold history. Every story is important. Every story deserves to be remembered. We'd love to hear from you too. Leave a comment to let us know where you're following from. Our community spans from Texas to Tasmania, encompassing everyone from veterans to history enthusiasts. You are all a part of something special here.